At 100 years old, Mel Brooks still can't talk about Gene Wilder without his voice catching. For 60 years, the world only ever saw the two of them laughing together, on stage, on camera, in interview after interview. Two comedy legends who seemed to exist purely to make each other and everyone around them laugh harder. What almost nobody clocked in real time was how much of that laughter was doing quiet, deliberate work, covering for a man who'd been carrying real pain since he was 8 years old. Brooks knew it. He saw it in Wilder's eyes before he ever really knew him. And now, a century into his own life, he's still the one telling the truth about exactly what that friendship actually cost and gave back over 5 decades. Here's the story he keeps returning to. Gene Wilder was born Jerome Silberman in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1933, the son and grandson of Russian Jewish immigrants who'd fled persecution to build a new life in America. He's said he always felt deeply Jewish and deeply grateful for it, even though he never believed in God or anything tied to the religion's actual doctrine. The defining wound of his childhood arrived when he was 8 years old, when his mother was diagnosed with a serious case of rheumatic heart disease. Her doctor pulled young Jerome aside and gave him an instruction he'd carry for the rest of his life. Never argue with her. Never make her angry. Always try to make her laugh, because anger might actually kill her. An 8-year-old boy was handed the job of keeping his own mother alive through comedy, performing warmth and lightness on command inside a house that had suddenly become fragile in a way no child should have to manage. It's impossible to separate that moment from everything he became. Not long after, his parents sent him to Black Fox Military Institute in Hollywood, hoping the discipline might be good for him, where he found himself the only Jewish boy enrolled at the school. He was bullied relentlessly there, and by his own later account, abused, a trauma severe enough that his family eventually pulled him out and sent him home for good. Another silent wound layered on top of the first. He found his way into acting slowly through community theater in Wisconsin and eventually a scholarship path that led him east. Before any of his film career began, he needed a new name entirely. Jerry Silberman, he decided, simply didn't work on a marquee. I couldn't imagine Jerry Silberman in Hamlet, he later explained. He took Gene from a cousin he admired and from the character Eugene Gant in the novel Look Homeward, Angel, and Wilder from the author Thornton Wilder, whose work he loved. Under that new name, he built a respectable stage career, appearing in a 1961 television adaptation of Roots and winning a Drama Desk Award for The Complacent Lover in 1963. It was his next stage role in Bertolt Brecht's Mother Courage and Her Children that changed everything. His co-star, Anne Bancroft, was dating a comedy writer at the time, and that writer started showing up after every performance to walk her home. I was in a play called Mother Courage by Bertolt Brecht with Anne Bancroft, whose boyfriend was Mel Brooks, Wilder later recalled, and Mel came to pick her up every night after the show. Brooks helped him work through a scene he was struggling with backstage one night, and the two men simply clicked. Brooks was quietly writing something at the time, a script called Springtime for Hitler, and he became convinced Wilder was the only actor alive who could play the nervous, panicked accountant Leo Bloom. Before Brooks had even secured financing, he told Wilder about the part, describing it in enough detail that Wilder spent months half believing a role he might never actually get to play. Years later, once the money finally came through, Brooks surprised Wilder in his dressing room, where he was preparing for a play, with the finished script in hand. Wilder didn't laugh this time. He broke down in tears of joy right there backstage. The film became The Producers, released in 1968, and Wilder's performance as a jittery, easily overwhelmed accountant swept up into a Broadway fraud scheme earned him his first Academy Award nomination, launching a film career that had, up to that point, barely existed. His actual screen debut had come a year earlier, in 1967, in a small but memorable role as Eugene Grizzard, a terrified bank hostage taken along for the ride in Bonnie and Clyde. A preview of the exact kind of controlled, escalating panic he'd spend the next decade perfecting into an art form. In 1971, Wilder was offered the role that would define him forever in the public imagination, the title character in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Director Mel Stewart offered him the part almost on the spot, but Wilder had one condition attached before he'd say yes. He wanted Wonka's very first entrance built around a deliberate lie. "I'd like to come out and all the crowd quiets down, and I'm using a cane," Wilder proposed, "and I walk slowly, and you can hear a pin drop, and my cane gets stuck in a brick, and I fall over on my face, and do a forward somersault, and jump up, and they all start to applaud." When Stewart asked why, Wilder's answer became the entire philosophy of the character. "Because no one will know from that point on whether I'm lying or telling the truth." It's a strange telling request from a man who'd spent his own childhood learning exactly how convincing a performed emotion could be when the real stakes were high enough. The film underperformed at the box office on release, something that surprised Wilder for years afterward. He always believed it was because of the genuine darkness he deliberately built into the role, especially the hallucinatory boat tunnel sequence, a moment he insisted the children in the audience always understood as a kind of morality play, even when their mothers didn't. "The kids weren't scared, the mothers were scared," he later explained. On behalf of the kids, it would take home video and a generation of parents finally relaxing about the film's edge before Willy Wonka became the beloved, iconic role Wilder is remembered for today, the one that made small children's eyes light up on sidewalks decades later, too nervous most of the time to say a single word to him. A year later, in 1972, Wilder took a supporting role in Woody Allen's Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex, but Were Afraid to Ask, playing a doctor who falls in love with a sheep, a performance that became an unexpected commercial success and pulled his career out of a genuine slump after a string of earlier disappointments. Then, in 1974, everything with Brooks reached its peak, with 2 films released the same year. Blazing Saddles became an instant satirical landmark, and Young Frankenstein, which Wilder co-wrote himself, became arguably the funniest film either man ever made. One scene very nearly didn't happen at all. Wilder had written a tap dance number for Dr. Frankenstein and his monster set to Irving Berlin's Puttin' on the Ritz. And when Brooks read the pages, he was horrified. "You tap dance to Irving Berlin in top hat and tails with the monster?" Brooks asked. "Are you crazy? It's frivolous." Wilder argued for 20 straight minutes, red in the face, before Brooks finally relented. When Wilder asked why he'd been put through such an ordeal for a scene Brooks apparently loved all along, Brooks explained his real test. "Because I wasn't sure if it was right or not," he said, "and if you didn't argue for it, I knew it would be wrong. But if you really argued, I knew it was right." It's one of the only real arguments the two men ever had in their entire friendship.
2 years later, in 1976, Wilder found a completely different creative partner in Richard Pryor on the set of Silver Streak, a pairing that would become one of Hollywood's first hugely successful interracial comedy duos, a partnership so effortless it would eventually be considered for a film called Trading Places, before Pryor's struggles with addiction pushed the studio toward Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy instead. Wilder later described his connection with Pryor in almost mystical terms, comparing it to something closer to instant attraction than professional chemistry. "I don't want to be shocking you, but it's a little bit like that feeling when you meet someone and you just know," he said. "When Richard and I did our first scene, some magic happened. We were on such a similar wavelength. That wavelength peaked during 1980's Stir Crazy, in a chaotic prison set scene where, without any planning at all, both actors began humming the exact same Laurel and Hardy tune at the exact same moment, in perfect rhythm, something neither of them could later explain to director Sidney Poitier or to each other. When Sidney called cut, I asked him, 'Did you know you were going to do that?' Wilder recalled. He said, 'No.' 'Did you know?' I said, 'No, I didn't, but we both did it on beat at the same time. There's something in the air that's just magic.'" Off camera, Wilder admitted, the connection never quite carried over the same way. "Not in private life so much," he said. "He had his own world, his friends, everything. I wanted more." The two reunited twice more on screen, in See No Evil, Hear No Evil in 1989, and another film years later, cementing one of comedy's most beloved screen partnerships, even as their real friendship stayed more distant than audiences assumed. In 1984, Wilder wrote, directed, and starred in The Woman in Red, casting his co-star from a role he'd met 3 years earlier on the set of Hanky Panky, a Saturday Night Live veteran named Gilda Radner. They married that same year, and by every account, adored each other completely. Two performers who'd each spent years being funny in public while carrying private histories the rest of the world never fully saw. The marriage was cut brutally short. While filming Haunted Honeymoon in 1986, Radner began experiencing exhaustion and pain that doctors repeatedly misdiagnosed as everything from stress to a minor infection, until she was finally correctly diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, a disease that had already spread significantly by the time anyone caught it. Wilder stayed by her side through every stage of her treatment, holding on to hope until the very end, refusing to let himself imagine the outcome that was quietly becoming inevitable. "I did believe, with all my heart,
that she was going to pull through and survive. He later said, "I was an idiot." Gilda Radner died in 1989 at just 42 years old. It remains, by nearly every account from those closest to him, the single most devastating loss of Wilder's entire life, a grief that reportedly hollowed him out in ways even his closest friends struggled to reach. Mel Brooks and his own wife, Anne Bancroft, stayed close through that period, unable to fix the scale of Wilder's grief, but refusing to let him disappear into isolation, showing up simply to sit with him when there was nothing else useful left to do. Wilder himself eventually channeled that loss into something lasting, co-founding Gilda's Club, a network of free support communities for cancer patients and their families, built around exactly the kind of connection and laughter Radner herself had always offered people, ensuring her name would keep helping people long after she was gone. That same year, while filming See No Evil, Hear No Evil, Wilder met Karen Webb, a lip-reading coach brought on to help him prepare for a role. The two lost touch, then reconnected after Radner's death, marrying in 1991 and remaining together for the rest of his life. In 1999, Wilder faced his own health crisis, diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He underwent chemotherapy, radiation, and eventually a stem cell transplant, a procedure he later described with characteristic dry humor. After the radiation and chemo, they thawed the stem cells and said, "Happy birthday to me," he recalled. His cancer went into full remission by 2002. Around that same period, he quietly stepped back from Hollywood almost entirely, explaining plainly in a 2002 interview why he never chased a comeback. "I don't like show business," he admitted. "I like acting in films. I love it. I love painting. I like the show, but not the business." Wilder's happiness in those later years was real, even as more hardship waited ahead. Speaking with Conan O'Brien about his memoir years later, he reflected on everything he'd survived with genuine warmth rather than bitterness. "I'm happier than I've ever been in my life," he said, a line that visibly moved the audience watching him say it. But in 2013, Wilder was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and he made a deliberate choice to keep it almost entirely private for the 3 years that followed. He didn't want fans, especially the children, who still recognized him on the street as Willy Wonka decades later, their eyes lighting up every few years as a fresh crop of kids discovered the film for the first time, to see him in decline. His family later explained the decision simply. He couldn't bear the idea of one less smile in the world. Gene Wilder died on August 29, 2016, at his home in Stamford, Connecticut, at 83 years old, from complications of the disease he'd spent 3 years quietly hiding. In his final moments, holding his family's hands, a speaker set to shuffle in the room happened to land on one of his favorite songs, Ella Fitzgerald singing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." A photograph of the two of them together from a London bar decades earlier, among his most treasured keepsakes for the rest of his life. His nephew Jordan Walker Perlman released the family's statement that day, calling it almost unbearable to contemplate life without him, describing a man who had coexisted with Alzheimer's for 3 years without ever once letting the public see the toll it was taking. Mel Brooks was one of the very first people to speak publicly that day, posting a statement that spread almost instantly across an industry in mourning. "Gene Wilder, one of the truly great talents of our time, is gone," he wrote.
He blessed every film we did together with his special magic, and he blessed my life with his friendship. He will be so missed." Sitting down with Jimmy Fallon days later for his first televised interview since the loss, still visibly shaken, Brooks admitted he'd known it was coming, that Wilder's decline had been impossible to ignore up close, even while the public remained unaware. "He was sick, and I knew it. He was such a dear friend," Brooks said. "I expected it. I expected he would go." Even having braced himself for months, hadn't made the actual loss feel any smaller once it finally arrived. That's really the whole truth Mel Brooks has spent the years since making sure people understand, decade after decade, interview after interview, right up through his own 100th year on Earth. Gene Wilder wasn't just his funniest, most reliable collaborator. He was a man who learned to perform joy at 8 years old to keep his mother alive, who carried that same instinct through a violent boarding school, through the loss of the great love of his life, through his own cancer, and finally through a disease that slowly took his memory before it took him completely. Brooks saw all of that underneath the panic and the wide eyes and the frizzy hair from the very beginning. Long before the rest of the world ever noticed, there was something worth protecting there. He said as much himself, describing Wilder as someone who always seemed to be carrying a quiet weight of endurance and sadness just beneath the surface, and admitting that part of what drew the two of them together so completely was exactly that, Brooks supplying the explosive, unfiltered energy Wilder needed to be pulled out of his own head, and Wilder supplying the restraint and control that kept Brooks's own chaos grounded in something real. Neither one, by his own account, ever fully worked the same way without the other standing nearby. Even now, at 100 years old, having outlived nearly every collaborator from that golden run of comedies, Mel Brooks still brings Wilder up unprompted in nearly every interview he gives, still calls him one of the truly great talents of his time without hesitation, still describes their friendship as one of the 2 or 3 things in his own long life he's proudest of having had at all. That's the truth Brooks keeps telling plainly, without embellishment, because it's the only truth that's ever actually mattered to him about Gene Wilder. Not the box office numbers, not the Oscar nominations, just a friend who blessed every film they made together and who blessed his life simply by being in it. If this look behind the laughter of Gene Wilder moved you, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. We'll keep pulling back the curtain on the real stories behind the comedies you grew up loving, because the truths behind those old laughs deserve to be remembered too.